Water like an umbrella. Hey! Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad. Hi, brother. Hi, sister. Sir. Hi, neighbor. Hi, friend. Welcome to my island. Welcome to my lovely island, Anguilla. Sun, moon, and stars and beautiful seas. Anguilla is where I want to be. There is nowhere in this whole wide world. Anguilla's the only place for me. White sand and turquoise sea, beauty and tranquility, friendly faces.
I see green.
Good evening, Anguilla, and welcome to the District 5 political debate organized by the Anguilla National Youth Council. I am Nadisia Lake, Speaker of the House of the Anguilla National Youth Parliament, and to the left of me is Karen Seros, Gender Affairs Coordinator. We will be the moderators for tonight's debates. May I ask that everyone please stand for the national song?
truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Mighty will make her. Long may she prosper. God grant the leaders wisdom and grace. May glory and honor ever attend her. First shall she stand throughout every age. With hearts and souls we'll build our nation proud, strong and free. We'll uphold her till to our hearts for eternity. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on.
Stay standing for a prayer.
Heavenly Father, we thank you first and foremost for life, good health, and strength. We thank you for Anguilla and for the brave individuals who have come forth to stand on the front line in the fight for a sustainable future. We humbly ask that you guide tonight's proceedings such that the debate is informative, empowering, and peaceful. In your precious name, amen. Nominees contesting in the 2020 general election will be given a chance to debate several areas of sustainable development. These debates seek to allow candidates to appeal to young voters and express their plans to achieve youth development nationally. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests.
Okay, now we'll get into the rules. Firstly, each candidate will be given 3 minutes to give an opening statement. Candidates will then be given 5 questions from the Anguilla National Youth Council on the Sustainable Development Goals. Each candidate will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to respond to the question. In this section, the candidate is only to refer to the moderator in his or her response. After a candidate has been given an opportunity to respond, a maximum of 2 minutes will be given to each candidate to rebut their stance of their opponent or share further information on the question or topic if so desired. Only in the rebuttal section are candidates allowed to respectfully refer to their opponents. After the initial 5 questions, questions will be fielded from the virtual and live audience. Questions must be posed to all candidates. Questions with hidden agendas or that may seem confrontational will not be asked. Questions can be submitted to a member of the Anguilla National Youth Council or to their Facebook page by searching Anguilla National Youth Council. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question from the audience with a minute to rebut if so desired. After this segment is completed, candidates will be given 3 minutes to give a closing statement. If questions are not clear, kindly ask the moderator to repeat the questions. The questions will also be visible on the screen in front of you guys.
These are the rules for the audience. To ensure a debate of quality, we ask the audience to respect all candidates. Please put your phones on silent. The audience is not allowed to applaud or make any noise of any kind to interrupt the response of any candidate. Any audience member that insists on doing such will be asked to leave. No one is allowed to go down into the public library. Once again, please be respectful. Our sponsors for tonight are the Government of Anguilla, Flow, Titanium Audiovisual, Pink Miko, Ashley & Sons, and Aranil. I will now introduce the candidates. Our first candidate tonight is Mr. Ramel Hughes. He is the candidate for District 5, an independent candidate for District 5. I apologize, Ramel Hughes. Our second candidate is Mrs. Everly Bradley, representing the Anguilla United Front, and she's representing District 5. Our third candidate is Mr. Merrick Hughes. Mr. Merrick Richardson, Anguilla Progressive Movement candidate representing District 5. We will now begin with the opening statements. I'll remind you that each candidate has 3 minutes to deliver their opening statement. We will begin with Mr. Ramel Hughes.
Sorry. Madam Moderators, please afford me a couple of seconds to extend condolences to the family of Sister Joan Gomes. She was a regular traveling member of our party when I played cricket or was an administrator in cricket. Madam Moderator, after 24 years, I resigned from the Anguilla Public Service and joined the ranks of the private sector as a consultant engineer. During that time, I worked extensively in Anguilla and throughout the Caribbean. During my stint as a water operator, I came across what was then referred to as the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals were the forerunner to the Sustainable Development Goals. They were mandated by the United Nations back in 2000 to fight against poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, degradation of the environment, and against women. During the decade of action of the Millennium Development Goals, work was carried out extensively throughout the world to try to address this problem. After the decade of action, a review was conducted which concluded that additional work was required, and thus the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals go further than the Millennium Development Goals in that it seeks to address the root cause of the difficulties faced by mankind throughout the world. They provide a blueprint for shared prosperity to all people, where they can live in productive, viable, vibrant, sustainable lives on a healthy planet. They do so by addressing the root causes of poverty, and they provide universal development so that people can benefit universally. They cover the 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. They were formulated for all countries throughout the world, as you indicated. And given our location in Anguilla and our topography, the effects of climate change will weigh heavily on its inhabitants. And therefore, it is critical for us that we, in looking to develop Anguilla, utilize the principle of the Sustainable Development Goals so that we all can live sustainable lives well into a future along with our children and our children's children. It is estimated that if these goals are achieved, it could open up market opportunities worth billions of dollars worldwide, plus creating millions, hundreds of millions of new jobs. Therefore, it is essential that we be cognizant of the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals provide us with partners throughout the world so that we can attain that feature while protecting our societies. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
We will now hear the opening statement from Mrs. Bradley.
Fellow candidate, Mr. Hughes, extend my heartfelt sympathy to the family of Joan Gums as well. I know that she was a big sporting icon. Good evening to the moderator and other officials of this debate, my fellow candidates, Mr. Hughes and Mr. Richardson. I think I might mention here that we all share bloodline, so I'm in good company. To the listening public via the various radio and social media platforms, and to you, the audience here with us this evening. Let me first commend the National Youth Council for the initiative in organizing these debates, and trust that indeed you will achieve your objective. Congratulations to you. As I reflected on the broad theme of this year's debates, youth and sustainable development, I came across a reference which states that sustainable development is maintaining a delicate balance between human need to improve social and economic conditions, while at the same time preserving our natural resources and ecosystems on which future generations depend. Literally speaking, what we have today must be preserved for tomorrow's generations. At this juncture, however, I must remind all of us here this evening that in my view, and no doubt in the view of all Bible-believing individuals in this room, this perfectly takes us back to the Genesis account of the creation story, where we as human beings were placed on this earth to be the caretakers and the stewards of all that God had so sacredly entrusted to us. But we betrayed that trust at the expense of our comfort, our survivability, and existence on planet Earth. In 2015, when leaders from 193 countries came together, they had one goal in mind: to create a group of goals that would ensure that the world's citizens had a decent quality of life filled with opportunities to educate themselves, access to health care, a level playing field, and the most essential services were provided. Today, these Sustainable Development Goals offer a blueprint for how governments and civil society should be expected to organize the provisions of public services. My term in office, 2015 to 2020, afforded me the opportunity to work closely with the Minister of Home Affairs, Mrs. Richardson-Hodge, a ministry that is committed to providing high-quality service to the public in all areas under its remit. The ministry remained steadfast in its quest to provide wide-ranging services to the Anguillan community, inclusive of modern labor legislation and modernization of Anguilla's constitution. We are not isolated on these issues, and as a consequence, this administration has already legislated for the banning of single-use plastics, which are harmful to the environment. Okay. Let me, at this point, thank the people of Road North constituency for the trust and confidence that they placed in me as their representative for the past 5 years, a task which I think I did to the best of my ability. I look forward to again representing your trust during the 2025 term, God being my helper. Thank you.
We will now hear the opening statement from Mr. Merrick Richardson.
Let me join in with the rest of the panel and extending sympathy greetings to the family of Joan Gomes. Good night, everyone. Good night, Madam Moderator. Good night to you, Mrs. Bradley, and to you, Mr. Hughes. On a personal level, I am particularly excited to be part of this broad and ongoing debate about youth empowerment, and indeed the engagement of youth in developing sustainable modes for development. I say that I am personally excited because my life's work has been centered on youth development. My involvement at the community level, especially through sports, speak to that lifetime commitment. Indeed, that is one of the main reasons that I thought it is important to elevate my engagement in the community by seeking to represent them at the highest level. The APM's comprehensive plan encompasses extensive training in traditional and non-traditional areas, but with a decisive emphasis on technology, developing a system of apprenticeship, and mentoring, creating incubators for small business development, economic diversification, which creates more opportunities for everyone, but particularly youths. A greater emphasis of the creative services sector and sports, and developing greater awareness and action on environmental matters. That, in essence, captures the youth development vision of the APM, which I am a proud member. I want to emphasize our focus on youth development as a difference to youth development. The main goal of youth empowerment is to improve the quality of life. Youth empowerment is more inclusive and thorough. Youth development is centered on developing individuals, while empowerment is focused on creating greater community change. Empowering the youth enables them to take on a leadership role in the community. Our commitment to this goal can be seen after today's nomination in the combination of our team members. We are of the belief that leadership training must start from early childhood, as these young adults learn to take gradual responsibility for their own decisions. Only through self-determination can these youth eventually achieve leadership in their respective communities. We need to encourage youth to pursue their own interests and help them integrate into their local communities. Ultimately, the establishment of young leaders in all aspects of society will improve the lives of all youth and improve our community as a whole. But to do that, youth should be offered new experiences and opportunities. These are ideas and areas we can debate and discuss as the night goes on. But just to state once again, I am more than happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, let's get right to it. We will start with Mrs. Everly Bradley, the Honorable Member for Road North. The first question states, what are your top 3 options for economic diversity in Anguilla? Rank and justify your choices. SDGs 1, 8, 9, 10, and 11. I will repeat the question. What are your top 3 options for economic diversity in Anguilla? Rank and justify your choices. SDGs 1, 8, 9, 10, and 11. You have 1 minute to prepare your responses. Okay, Mrs. Bradley. I'll repeat the question one more time. What are your top 3 options for economic diversity in Anguilla? Rank and justify your choices. SDGs 1, 8, 9, 10, and 11. You have 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much for the question. My first top priority will be diversification through agriculture. This pandemic has really demonstrated to us the need to really diversify our economy as well as looking at food security. We know that we are constrained by government finances, etc. But I believe that once we are able to diversify our economy, given the use of agricultural lands, etc., I'm sure that that would be able to provide food for our families, even to the point that we can perhaps export. As we look around and we see from our own experiences what can be grown here in Anguilla as it relates to various crops, I think it should give us a good idea as to how agriculture can help us diversify our economy. We also look at fisheries. We have heard for ages about the 200-mile exclusive fishing zone to the north of us that has not been explored or has not been explored enough as it relates to having the equipment, having the vessels, and because it would require going out there for a number of days to be able to find the fish, and as well as being able to catch fish that can be exported and also feed our families, and can also be a source of providing small industries through fishing plants, etc. And we have got a mantra: you grow what you eat, and you eat what you grow. And I believe it is important to know that as Anguillians, as people as Anguillians, we can explore that opportunity of agriculture and growing what we eat. I believe also that to this end, the agricultural department will have to be more prominent in assisting with the services offered in this way for the public.
Mr. Merrick Richardson.
Yes. The top 3 options I will have, we'll start with agriculture. First, we have to make agriculture a lot more attractive, especially for our young people. Because right now, as it stands, agriculture is viewed as something for older folks or folks who don't have a higher education. But there's so much spin-offs from just growing agriculture and also in poultry. We sometimes forget that you don't just grow the fruit, you have to find the best ways to grow fruits and vegetables. And if you know the sciences behind growing the fruit and the vegetables, then that also creates jobs for other persons. So it wouldn't just be the farmers, it'll also be the ones who have to find out how do we plant better, how do we get bigger trees, and that's where we go from there. And then in our fishing, we have a situation where Mrs. Bradley just said we have 200 miles of water to the north that we keep hearing every time elections come up, we're going to explore fishing to the north. But nothing ever happens with it. We at the APM intend to develop a fishing processing plant that would eliminate our fishermen just having to come and find sources, their own sources to sell the fish. We will have the fishing plant there. They will come in, bring in their catch. We will pay them for their catch, and they go away happy with the payment. The other thing we would like to see developing is our arts and crafts. Our arts and crafts is a good spin-off from our tourism industry. We have great artists. I was at a gym the other day and I saw a young man who did some paintings. Wonderful work done. But where's the market for him in Anguilla? We can tap into our tourism industry and develop that market a lot more. Thank you.
Mr. Romel Hughes.
Madam Moderator, I would like to diversify first within the tourism sector. Why? Because tourism is a growing concern. And presently, tourism is restricted, our source market is restricted to North America and Western Europe. And since we have the tourism infrastructure already, we can expand our tourism season by trying to expand our source market to Central and South America so we can broaden our tourism season. With that in mind, when things happen in North America, we can still have tourism ongoing. We also need to link tourism to what we do in Anguilla and what we have in Anguilla. For example, we have the Fountain Cavern that I have never seen it, but I understand that there are enormous artifacts in there. We need to offer more for to our tourists when they come here so they have a wider experience in Anguilla. The other thing I'd like to do in expanding our economic product is to expand on fisheries and agriculture, not them separately, but jointly. Fisheries in the sense that we can tap the economic potential of the fishing waters to the north and east of Anguilla by either encouraging our fishermen to exploit them or selling the rights to international purveyors to use those waters. We already do fishing, so we should be able to build on that and thereby expand our tourism economic leg much more readily. But the most important one I'd like to deal with is creating Anguilla, turning Anguilla into a business center, an international business center. A lot of people speak about offshore financial services, but I want to go further than that. I want to be able to use Anguilla as a hub where we can do programming here for international companies and therefore create a much more expansive product in terms of our economic activity. By so doing, we can put our economy on a much sounder footing than we are presently. The COVID-19 have demonstrated to us that food security is essential. And when I say food security, what I mean is that we must be able to feed ourselves, and we must make good choices in feeding ourselves, because every dollar that we save is equivalent to a dollar earned, and it's less money that will be going out of the system to support someone else. So if we can grow what we eat and eat what we grow in a smart way, because food affects health as well, we can have more sustainable lives and happier lives going forward.
Each candidate will now have an opportunity to rebut their opposing candidates. You will have 2 minutes to do such. Is anyone interested in rebutting anything anyone has said?
No need to rebut.
No? Okay, we will move right on to question 2 then.
Question 2. What is your understanding of the status of hunger and poverty in Anguilla? And if elected, how would you address this? Question 2. What is your understanding of the status of hunger and poverty in Anguilla? And if elected, how would you address this? Once again, you each have 2 minutes to prepare your response. I'm sorry, 1 minute. Okay, your time is up. We will start with Mr. Merrick Richardson.
Thank you. How I see poverty in Anguilla, we have different types of poverty. We have poverty that would have been caused by hurricanes and our recent COVID-19. That causes poverty because, especially in our hotel industry, persons are out of work for an extended period of time. And of course, no income, no way to pay the bills, no way to feed your family. Another type of poverty is generational poverty, where persons, through lack of education opportunities or lack of proper job opportunities, they just have a generational, one generation, second generation of poverty. And then there's the other poverty, as I see it, where a family just is not making enough to support the household. What I would like to see happen is that, and we in the APM believe this, we will create a hospitality protection plan where maybe 1.5% of the accommodation tax that already comes in, that's already collected, would go into this plan, so then when we do have pandemics, when we do have natural disasters, our workers in the hotel industry can benefit from it. In the terms of the generational poverty, we have to look at job creation, and we just spoke at length about the agricultural sector. That's a sector that I feel is untapped in Anguilla in terms of how much we can get from it. So if we put the right persons in place, put the right things in place, we can develop that and move on from poverty. And then in terms of the poverty that's affecting generations, or the relative poverty, we actually need to look at a minimum wage. We have talked about increasing our taxes. We know GST is coming, but nothing has been discussed about a minimum wage. So that is another way I would like to see it happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Hughes, it's now your turn.
Poverty can be a very intractable problem. Hunger is much more readily addressed. We have to look at these things on two levels. One, there's short-term hunger that can occur on the spur of a moment when someone loses a job. And the problem with hunger is that some people are so proud it is very difficult to reach them. So if it is family related, we can provide support structure where family can assist in ensuring that people are fed on a short-term basis. But going forward, in order to address the problem in a more systematic manner, we need to provide hope and opportunity to people. They must be able to be able to feed themselves. And just having a job is not good enough. My opponent referred to as a minimum wage. A minimum wage isn't good enough because statistics have shown that a huge amount of people, hundreds of millions of people, have jobs but still live in poverty. We need to ensure that we can provide livable wage jobs that provide living wages that people can live on, and not just a wage for a wage's sake. Because otherwise we find families having to work 4 and 5 jobs just to make ends meet. And we don't want that because families have a lot more to do than just work in order to make society function. So just having a minimum wage is not good enough. We need to provide working people with a livable wage, a wage by which they can work on. And this will address the more endemic part of poverty. Hunger, we need to be ensured that we can feed ourselves. And we talk about agriculture all the time, but we also need to look at what is the debilitating factors restricting the agriculture. And because we live in such an arid climate, we need to ensure that the water that agriculture needs is affordable. Not only that, we need to employ new technologies to ensure that the water required to grow the specific crops that is necessary is available. So Just saying agriculture is not just good enough. You need to employ the technologies that is available. You need to bring down the cost of water so that farmers who want to grow on a much larger scale can do so. But first and foremost, we need to start with the individual and with families that they can feed themselves so that we can address hunger in the short term and poverty in the long term. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mrs. Bradley, we'll now hear from you.
Here in Anguilla, I'm sure that we do have small pockets of hunger and poverty, but not in the scale that you'll probably find it in other parts of the world. And I believe that one way we can address this is being able to, as a short-term measure, have some sort of financial assistance. And I think that presently that is happening through the Department of Social Welfare. But at the same time, I think the situation is that we should be able to provide some form of other assistance to make these persons self-dependent, in perhaps even offering them a plot of land to be able to grow their own foodstuff and to feed themselves and their families, or even exposing them to skill training where they can perhaps find to do some arts and crafts to be able to get some money to assist with their families, and as well as having small cottage industries like even sewing or making jams and doing arts and craft, making them self-dependent. So I believe that, these are some of the issues that we can also look into in trying to alleviate some of the hunger and the poverty that people may be experiencing.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradley. You will now each have 2 minutes to rebut any of your opponent's points or provide any additional information or evidence to what you presented in your responses.
I slightly disagree with Mrs. Bradley when she said that we only have small pockets of hunger in Anguilla. We've all heard the story of many children going to school hungry. And if they're probably only going to school hungry. Nobody willingly sends their child to school hungry. They're only going to school hungry because they don't have the necessary resources at home to have a proper breakfast. I have children going to primary school, and there's this lovely lady at the road school who brings breakfast to school every morning for quite a number of students. And I'm sure these students aren't taking this breakfast just because they want to have a free meal. They're taking it because they don't have any other sources. So I have to humbly disagree with Mrs. Bradley that we only have small pockets of hunger. What we have to do is now find out and get the necessary resources to find out how far this hunger goes. And I think that's not what we are not doing that right now. Thank you.
I can attest to that because I've seen it in secondary school. Children come to school hungry, and the big difficulty is, though, they will not tell you. If you recognize that a kid is out of it, you might ask him what is the problem, and he'll find it difficult to tell you. But a lot of times they are hungry, because the short time that I taught at secondary school, I've had reason to give kids money to get something to eat because they were hungry.
Mrs. Bradley, would you like to rebut any points or provide any additional information to your response?
Well, in actual fact, I believe that Yes, there may be persons, children, I know of cases, yes, children going to school, but I didn't think it was on such a large scale as Mr. Hughes and Mr. Merrick indicated.
Can I add something, Madam Moderator?
Sure.
And I think that is part of the problem. We do not really keep statistics and records so that we can identify the scale of the problem. And because if we were to know exactly what the scale of it was, we probably might be more readily be able to address it. However, we need to ensure that particularly our younger people, our younger members of our community, we need to put systematic efforts in place so that if they are hungry, they can get access to the food that they need.
We'd like to remind the crowd once again that whilst the candidates are speaking, you guys should be quiet. And if you guys aren't quiet, I will have to ask you respectfully to leave the room. We'll move on with question 3. Question 3 asks, what key challenges in the current education system in Anguilla would your vision of educational reform respond to? What key challenges in the current education system in Anguilla would your vision of educational reform respond to? SDG 4 and 11. You have 1 minute to prepare your responses.
Can I use that 1 minute to talk?
I'd like to give...
I'll get 4 minutes to talk, that's all I'm saying.
I'd like to give the other candidates a chance so that they can start to prepare.
No, but they can prepare while I talk.
Okay, let's go. You have the floor.
But if we prepare...
Once we get the room quiet back down, you can start, Mr. Hughes.
Then we have to rebut. We have to rebut.
Okay, Mr. Hughes, you can start now. I'll repeat the question first. What key challenges in the current education system in Anguilla would your vision of educational reform respond to? And this question speaks to SDG 4 and 11. And I think we had some persons on the live feed asking what is an SDG, so I'll just say it's a sustainable development goal.
Yes. A sustainable development goal aimed at addressing the plight of humankind throughout the world, specifically to deal with hunger and poverty. In Anguilla, our education system has a number of faults, a number of problems that we need to address in a very serious way. But we need to address them from the foundational level. Our preschool system needs to be looked at seriously. Not all our children go to preschool because it is a monetary-based system. If you don't have the resources, you won't send your children to preschool. So therefore, when they went to primary school, which is a free school, some of our children are starting at different grades, and that hampers their development. So we need to make preschool or focus school, whatever you want to call it, available to all our children. And it should be, the resources necessary to keep it going should be provided by the state, because children is the most important investment that we can make as a society, investment in our children. Beyond that, we need to also make sure that the teachers that teach in preschools are well remunerated for their services, because at the age our children go to preschool, that is when they learn fastest. And we need to ensure that the teachers that we employ to teach them are well equipped, well trained, and they are well remunerated for their service, so that there is not the high turnover that is engendered in that system currently, in some cases because there are not enough resources to remunerate them. But beyond that, we need to look at our primary school system very seriously. The primary school system determines what comes out of our secondary school. And if the product going into the secondary school is not well prepared, we won't get what we believe we should get coming out of the secondary school. We need to do a number of things in our primary school. We need to put specialist teachers in the core subject areas in our primary school. We need to be able to identify, our teachers should be able to identify learning disabilities with children in that school, so that we can design early interventions to address those learning disabilities. We also need to ensure that children going to preschool have the wherewithal to be well fed, and so that they can be engaged in what is going on in the school. Those three things, if we can do those three things, especially ensuring that our preschoolers have access to specialist teachers in the core subject areas, will go a long way in addressing the difficulties that we end up with in secondary school. And another area that we need to look at is parenting. Parenting determines the quality of children that we get going through our preschool system, our school system generally. And we need to establish a unit within the social welfare department that is geared to teaching young parents and first-time parents the art of parenting. Thank you.
Mrs. Bradley, you can now answer the question.
I believe that one of the departments that get one of the hardest knocks in the system is the education department. But notwithstanding that, I think we still owe a measure of gratitude to our teachers and all those who take responsibility for our children. And over the years, we hear stories about children coming out of school who can't read and who can't write, etc., and who have problems with numeracy skills. And I believe that one of the issues is that these are things that must be tackled from very low down on the educational ladder from primary school level. And that problem has been recognized. And one of the focus for this year will be to put maths and literacy specialists in the various schools. I think one of the other issues that we also have to deal with as well is that for some reason, some persons feel that technical and vocational training is not on the same level as academic training. But I think it has been established that having been trained in skills, the technical education is even more important and sometimes earns even a bigger wage than other positions. And I think that one of the areas that we really need to focus on and look at is having that whole TVET education program reformed, and that I know that our ministry is beginning to tackle. As we can also see that given what is happening now with the children in school, e-learning is taking a very prominent role as it relates to our children's education. And that area of information technology needs to be also carefully looked at. So those are my views on that.
Mr. Richardson, you can now answer the question.
Yeah, the thing about education, we have to be careful that we only focus on the academics, and we leave many students on the fringes, the athletes, the ones who are more technical oriented, you know. And we also have to focus on quality education instead of quantity. I have a daughter in grade 2, and the amount of work she gets, it amazes me. So it seems like we're just focusing on testing as opposed to children actually learning. You're forcing them to just memorize, and they're not learning, they're not doing actual learning. You know, we are now in 2020, and we should be more focused on things like robotics, coding, programming, things that are going to take us beyond, not just the traditional type of learning, you know. And we also have to focus more on our industrial skills, such as carpentry, masonry, auto mechanics. When I was going to school a couple years ago, we used to have what they used to call the Vortex Center, and persons could have actually gone there and come out well versed in woodwork, carpentry, auto mechanics, technical drawing. I know they are still offered in the school, but it's at like a very, very small period now, as opposed to that's where you actually go to learn, you know. And so we have to prepare our children not just for jobs, but for innovation, because like I said, the world is getting more advanced, a lot more advanced, and we have to prepare our young persons to be part of that global world. Thank you.
Would any of the candidates like to rebut or add additional information? Okay, Mr. Hughes, you can go ahead.
Yes, the world is a very dynamically placed today. It is changing at an ever-increasing rate. And the norms of yesteryear are no more applicable today than they will be tomorrow. And the education that we provide our children today have to create critical thinkers and problem solvers so as to be able to cope with the advent of artificial intelligence, the chaos that we see around. They are the equipment of the future. Our kids must be in that environment. But there's something else that I'm concerned about. In this age of COVID-19, e-learning became the standard. But I wonder how much assistance that we provided to some of the kids that we have at home who had to take part in this, because I was concerned about kids from the Dominican Republic whose parents cannot cope with English. How much assistance has been provided to them to navigate this period that we are going through, and that is a concern. When school resumes, I'm not sure how they will be able to cope or keep up with what is going on, because there is this gap. They do not have the support structure at home to have helped them. I don't know how the education system bridged that gap in this time of COVID-19.
I would just also like to add that, picked up from Mr. Hughes' point, that as parents, we too need to take a more active role in the parenting and the education of our children. I know that there are times when we are constrained to do this because of perhaps having to work several jobs. But I believe that we have to recognize that the investment that we make in our children now, we cannot compromise that investment, and make sure that we give our children the attention that is due to them during those formative years of their lives. It is very important that as parents, we take that active role in our children's education.
I also feel that we need to implement a tracking mechanism so that we actually know what our children or what our students are doing when they leave school. Because sometimes, I'm a basketball coach and I encounter youths all the time, and sometimes they're 2-3 years out of school without a job. And I'm always concerned as to whether they're being tracked, whether anyone is aware that these children are 2-3 years out of school, no job. What are we doing to cover those things? And this is a debate, and I'm trying to be as humble as possible to my colleague, Mrs. Bradley, but I sometimes get a little concerned when I hear we are working on something when there was a time period and this thing should have at least been started, because stuff like our industrial skills, they're not being developed, but there was a period that at least something should have been made towards that. Thank you.
Any last comments?
I believe that vocational training is quite good. However, if you don't have the basics, you still will not succeed at vocational training. That's the reason why I would place a lot more emphasis on our primary schools. If you want to be a carpenter, mason, you still must be able to measure 1.5 inches, 1 1/4 inches. And one of the things I found out, even in secondary school, kids had a lot of difficulty dealing with fractions. And not everything that we do are in wrong numbers. So the foundation is particularly important when we come to education of our children, because it determines the altitude to which they will go.
I agree with you, Mr. Hughes, to some point, but at the same time, while we all have created with different intellectual abilities, and sometimes there might be persons out there who may not be able to decipher, but can be the best mechanics, can be the best carpenters, can be the best contractors. And, we also have to make provision for those things as well.
Yeah, but they still have to know the basics in order to get to those levels.
Okay.
Just to be fair, since this was a third round of rebuttal, if Mr. Richardson would like to make a comment, I will allow him to do so.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. And I do agree that the basics, that we definitely need the basics. But if you know that's all they're going to be focused on, in the basics, in your heart you want to be a mechanic, and they're telling you need to learn English, maths, biology, even though you're going to need those, but you're not focusing on getting you towards to be the auto mechanic, you're not going to put your focus on fractions, because in your mind that does not help you. So yes, the basics are necessary, but we definitely need to put something in place for the kids who are more geared toward the industrial skills. Thanks.
Thank you. We will now move on to question 4. If you had to choose between allocating funds to establish a mental health rehabilitation center and a drug rehabilitation center, which would you choose and why? This responds to SDGs 3 and 16. If you had to choose between allocating funds to establish a mental health rehabilitation center and a drug rehabilitation center, which would you choose and why? You will each have 2 minutes. 1 minute to prepare your responses. We will begin with Mrs. Bradley.
I believe, I have no doubt that if there was a choice between those two, my choice would be the rehabilitation center. Why the rehabilitation center? Is because that is a preventative measure.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Bradley. I should have repeated the question before you began, so let me do so. If you had to choose between allocating funds to establish a mental health rehabilitation center and a drug rehabilitation center, which would you choose and why? This question responds to SDGs 3 and 16.
The rehabilitation center, to my mind, will be the first choice. Reason why? Because we all know the destructive forces.
Please pause, Mrs. Bradley. Audience, please keep the noise level down. We need to respect the candidates' time to provide their answers, please.
The destructive forces of drug abuse, which can even lead to greater mental health issues. And I believe that having the rehabilitation center would be a way of averting even greater problems, greater issues to the society, to the families, to the children, because when using drugs leads to mental health issues, then I believe that the problems even are exacerbated. So from my standpoint, I believe that I would prefer to see those funds firstly go into establishing a rehabilitation center.
Mr. Merrick Richardson, you can now address the question.
Yes. I would choose the Mental Health Rehabilitation Center because the white elephant in the room sometimes in Anguilla, we like to say, he head ain't no good. He don't behave normal. But what do we have in place to really test these? And as somebody who works with a lot of young people, you get to talk to them and not being equipped to actually handle the matters when you know they're beyond you. But you can tell that there's something not right with a 14-year-old or 15-year-old. You're continually getting reports, he's acting up in class, he's behaving rude. But when you question his background or you question his mental ability to perform things, you realize this young man needs evaluation. But there's nothing in place. It's only when they get into the system, he do something that we think is wrong, and he ends up in Zenada or in the court system, is that when we mandate, okay, he needs to get a psychiatric evaluation. But I think we should have persons in place to identify these from early, and once we identify them from early, they get a proper treatment. So that is why I would go with having a mental health rehabilitation center.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Hughes?
Madam Moderator, I don't believe it's a binary choice. I believe both is necessary. However, if I had to choose, I would choose the drug rehabilitation center. Why? Because in Anguilla, there are more prevalence of persons who use drugs, particularly marijuana, than anything else. So the potential for persons becoming addicted to drugs is greater than it is than we deal with mental health. However, it feeds back to a question I answered earlier. If we have in schools, especially our primary schools, persons who can diagnose learning disabilities early on, we can mitigate a lot of problems that Representative Richardson is talking about. But in truth and in fact, both are necessary, and I don't think it's a binary choice. However, because of the prevalence of drugs in our society, albeit soft drugs, the potential exists where you may get persons going in that direction that you might have to deal with. But even when they go overboard, they all end up into the mental health state. And that's the reason why I doesn't believe it's a binary choice.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Candidates, you will now have 2 minutes to provide a rebuttal or to give additional information or evidence to any of your earlier responses. Mr. Hughes? Mr. Richardson, if you are ready, you can go.
What?
All three candidates have already answered the question, and now we're asking for the rebuttals. Mr. Richardson would like to go, so we are going to give him that opportunity.
Mr. Hughes, while I do not condone the use of any illegal substance, I have to disagree a little bit when you spoke about marijuana, because we're here talking about rights, and we have to be careful if we're going to be trampling on the rights of our Rastas in our community, because the marijuana is considered part of their spiritual process. It's part of their spiritual celebration, and there's a big push right now and in a lot of countries, marijuana has already been decriminalized or it's legal. So I do disagree with you a little bit on that in terms of we have to focus on our mental health, because marijuana, yes, it's a soft drug, and like I said before, I do not condone the use of any illegal substances, but the push should be to our mental health, because that is something that we keep sweeping under the rug. We are caring communities, so luckily, in most cases, when there's someone who have mental problems, the family usually takes care of them, so we don't see them roam in the streets, we don't hear a lot about them, because we are such a caring community. But there's a lot of mental health issues in our community that we really do need to address.
If you listen to my response, I told you that I said that it wasn't a binary choice. Both was necessary. However, one leads to the other, and if you can mitigate it at the top, you don't have to deal with it at the bottom end. You don't have to leave somebody fall off the rails to then try to address the problem. If you address the problem before they get there, we will all be better off.
The only thing I would sort of add to that actually is that, when we look at our young children who get themselves involved in drug use, I think it would be a good thing if they were offered that kind of assistance, psychosocial assistance or counseling assistance, which I believe is done, but being able to have a system in place where the teachers, the parents, everybody could be involved in trying to rehabilitate or to sort of avert some of the issues as it relates to drug abuse and then ending up in a mental health institution. I think that would also go a long way in trying to help our young people.
Can I add something, Madam Moderator? Can I add something? Sure. Mr. Richardson referred to decriminalization of marijuana, soft drug-like marijuana. I have no problem with decriminalizing marijuana. However, it must go hand in hand with public education as the potential risk. Very few people that grew up with me smoke cigarettes. In Anguilla, generally very few people smoke cigarettes. And you know why? I have put it down to the fact that most people in Anguilla are alerted to the harmful effects of cigarettes. Very few of us are alerted to the harmful effects of marijuana, even though it is an illegal commodity at the present time. So if we want to decriminalize it, we must put it together with a public education program that alerts people, particularly our young people, to the potential hazards of it.
Any other responses? No. Okay, we will now move on to our final question.
Currently, Anguilla waste ends up in the Carato landfill. Do you think that the Carato landfill has a place in Anguilla's sustainable future? Justify your answer. SDGs 9, 11, and 12. I will repeat the question. Currently, Anguilla's waste ends up in the Carato landfill. Do you think that the Carato landfill has a place in Anguilla's sustainable future? Justify your answer. SDGs 9, 11, and 12. You have 1 minute to prepare. Mr. Richardson, we'll start with you. I'll repeat the question. Currently, Anguilla's waste ends up in the Carato landfill. Do you think that the Carato landfill has a place in Anguilla's sustainable future? Justify your answer. SDGs 9, 11, and 12.
My answer to that is a definite no. The Carato landfill has already outlived its usefulness to Anguilla. I mean, if anyone who has ever visited that site can see that what we do down there, the household waste, we just cover it over. It comes, we cover it over. And we have to be really careful how it's going to affect generations to come. Because up until recently, even hospital waste was dumped at the Carato site. And if these things are leaking into our water table and all of us are drinking these things, we can have some serious health issues going forward. As a matter of fact, it might have already started because Anguilla have a very, very high rate of cancer. And we still are trying to figure out what are causing these cancer incidents in Anguilla. That may be something we need to look at because this thing has been going on for years. Reports have been done already that this place has outlived its usefulness. And we definitely need to start looking at alternative measures. We're in 2020 again, and sometimes I might be called naive, but why don't we have recycling in place in Anguilla in this day and age? Again, like I said, I might be naive, but it baffles me. Thanks.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes, I believe the Carato landfill has a place in our society. In fact, the means by which we dispose of our waste is important, yes, and we need to make sure that it is as sightly as possible. But Carato landfill, one man's waste is another man's treasure. Carato landfill, as it currently exists, gives off a putrefying gas that is highly useful. The methane gas that comes from landfill are used to drive a lot of power stations throughout the world. In our case, it may not be as large as it can be to do so, but the methane gas is very valuable, and it is a much cleaner fuel than what we use to produce our electricity today. And if it can be harnessed, and it can be, We should be using it to help drive our economic engine as electricity. Going to the alternatives. One of the ways we evaluate the usefulness of things is to look at the costs and the impacts of the alternatives. There was, a few years ago, one of our administrations was looking to put a waste-to-energy system in place so that it could scour the Carato landfill to come up and use the waste that is being deposited there. The end result of that would result in acidification of our oceans, which will then create another set of problems. It will destroy our fisheries. And the ocean is one of the primary resources that the earth depends on in order to sustain lives. As you will note in one of the MDGs, the ocean drives the habitat that makes earth livable. And if we destroy that resource by using an alternative source to landfills, like burning the waste, we will be creating a lot more damage than the landfill is doing at the present time. So yes, it can be used sustainably to produce energy that we can use, because the gas that it gives off is much cleaner than what we do now. And the alternative to it, we would not like to know the results of it.
Mrs. Bradley?
My response to that would be yes, based on the fact that I know that with all the modern technology that we have now, there is a system, as Mr. Hughes said, of turning waste into energy. I traveled across to the forest a couple weeks ago, and I was really amazed to see the amount of garbage and that kind of thing in the landfill. And I went back to my years in England, sometime in England a couple of years ago, and what I see there is that they have different bins for the different types of garbage. Even the food, they're recycling the food so that they could, use it in sustainable development. And I believe that these are areas that I believe as time goes by, we will have to consider as it relates to sustainable development issues in Anguilla.
Rebuttals, anyone?
You going?
I'm not sure what's going on.
No, I thought he wanted to rebut. That's why.
Oh,
Yeah, I was going. I thought he was going to rebut. That's why I was waiting.
okay. Who would like to go first?
Let me go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Richardson, you can go. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Both of you said yes, but I think, again, the elephant in the room is that the question said, do we think it has a place in Anguilla's sustainable future? And as it's currently set up, it does not. Because you both said that in your answer, as it's set up, we know it can go. So what are we doing about recycling? And if anybody has visited that site, on the western side, there's a row of tires from here to God knows where. Why aren't we looking at maybe seeing if these tires can be shipped overseas to be retreaded? Because we do know used tires come into Anguilla. That can be an alternative, and then we wouldn't have to be worried about loading up the dump site with tires. And if you go on the dump site, there's a whole bunch of old vehicles, old appliances, and everything. Why aren't we looking into getting these recycled? So again, the question says, is the Carato landfill has a place in Anguilla's sustainable future? And as it is currently set up, it does not. So we have to start looking at alternatives.
I respectfully disagree. And my opponent is saying that is recycling. The reason why the tires are there I believe, and I'm highly certain of this, maybe not 100%, but very high, is because they want to do the very same thing he's saying with them. The problem with it is that they are insufficient to be made economical. For recycling to be economical and viable, the value must be of a particular amount in order to make it substantial. Martinique has about 5 to 6, probably a couple hundred times more larger population than here, and recycling is not viable in Martinique. There are things, however, that we can do in Carito. As I said earlier, one man's waste is another man's treasure. There are things that we can do in Carito that can make it useful. Mrs. Bradley mentioned the food that goes to Carito. We can use that food on a site in Carito and turn it into compost. I see that happening in Jamaica. I've seen them taking the treated sewage that go to the sewage plant and turn it into fertilizer. But the mechanism by which it gets to that point goes through the same thing. Recycling is a very good idea, but the volume to make it viable is not affordable in Anguilla because one big problem, our population is not large enough to generate the volume of waste that will make recycling possible. And we can do recycling for ourselves. We can all do recycling for ourselves when we buy containers. My old man, some say he's thrifty, but he's a great recycler. He uses every container 100 times before he discards it. We can do that for ourselves individually. But Carito is a necessary land site, and it can provide us, if we so choose, to utilize the resources that it gives.
Mr. Hughes, your time is up. Ms. Bradley, would you like to rebut? Or
It's not much to rebut, really. Just to say that it might not happen now, but be assured that as technology advances and as things become more, as we look at sustainability from a different point of view, then perhaps you could see the need for this type of activity in the future.
Thank you, candidates. This brings us to the end of the questions regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. We will now delve into the questions from the audience. You will have 2 minutes to answer each question from the audience and a 1-minute rebuttal if you so desire. First question, and this is somewhat of a two-part question. Why is it that more is not done in our schools to help to alleviate hunger? Second part, what can be done to decrease the number of children who attend school hungry on a daily basis? Why is it that more is not done in our schools to help alleviate hunger? What can be done to decrease the number of children who attend school hungry on a daily basis? I think we ended the formal set of questions starting with Mr. Richardson, so we start with Mr. Hughes now.
The first thing is that we need to know who is hungry, and that is a very intractable problem. I think we need to make the meals available, and those who are hungry can partake. However, if we go around trying to find out who needs food, we probably will never find anybody who will say, yes, I'm hungry. But if we made food available, those who are hungry will eat. So the powers that be needs to look at how we can make meals, particularly breakfast, available to school children while they are in school. And I believe if we do that, more of our kids will want to partake of it. But trying to determine who is hungry so that we can provide them specifically with food, socially it may not be acceptable to some of our kids, and because of the stigma that may go with it. But making the food available is what I believe would draw more of them to ensure that they eat what they require.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mrs. Bradley, it's your turn. I will repeat the question again since it's not up on the screen. Why is it that more is not done in our schools to help to alleviate hunger? What can be done to decrease the number of children who attend school hungry on a daily basis?
Well, I believe that if it is a case of not knowing that it is such a prevalent issue within the schools, I think that's the first step. We should know, that there is a need. So many children go to school hungry. And I am of the view that once that is established, then there should be a feeding program within the school. And as Mr. Hughes rightly said, some children perhaps would be reluctant to come and say that they are hungry. But if you have a general feeding program within the schools where all the children are fed, then you can be assured that all the children will get something to eat if they are hungry. I think that is one of the issues in solving that problem, having an established feeding program within the schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradley. Mr. Richardson, I will repeat your question again. Why is it that more is not done in our schools to help to alleviate hunger? What can be done to decrease the number of children who attend school hungry on a daily basis?
And I think for the first time for the night, we all agree on something. More is not done to alleviate hunger because I think persons just aren't aware. If a child goes hungry, his friend probably covers for him, split his money, buy him breakfast, buy him lunch, and that sort of thing. So much persons in authority is not aware that these kids are coming to school hungry. And to alleviate that problem, yes, we would have to introduce some kind of school feeding program, whether a minimal fee have to be paid per term, something like that. But we have to introduce a school program so that we know everyone is fed and no one falls through the cracks. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Would anyone like to provide a rebuttal? Okay, so we will move on to the second question.
Okay, the second question from the audience asks, if elected, what are 3 things you would do to develop your district? I'll repeat. If elected, what are 3 things you would do to develop your district? We will start with Mr. Hughes. No, wait. Who did we start with?
I think we started with Mr. Hughes last.
Who did we start with just now?
Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes started because I answered last.
Yes. So we'll start with Ms. Bradley. Sorry about that.
That's no problem.
Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Bradley.
Repeat the question again.
I'll repeat the question. If elected, what are 3 things you would do to develop your district?
Okay. We all know the importance of sporting facilities within our island, and I think that is one of our shortcomings. So I would really love to see sporting and recreational facilities established throughout the various communities in the district. Secondly, Sandy Ground is one of the most beautiful communities in Anguilla. And I believe that I would really love to see, even throughout the district, a nice beautification project. I recall that when we were young children growing up, there were coconut trees lining each side of Sandy Ground, and as you walked on Back Street, it was indeed a beauty to see. Apart from that, Sandy Ground is one of the main entertainment communities in Anguilla, and we could do some rejuvenation project work there to really improve the aesthetics and the beautification of Anguilla. The next thing I would like to also see, this may not come, as a physical, something that you can see physically, but we have to be able to look at our older people, look at our elderly, make sure that, they are well taken care of, they're well cared for, because they were the ones who really paved the way for us.
Mr. Richardson, if elected, what are 3 things you would do to develop your district?
I'll start with Sandy Ground. A couple months back, I had the opportunity right here in this hall to attend a Sixth Form Small Business Basket Initiative. And these youngsters came up with the most amazing ideas for developing around the salt pond. And quite a few of those ideas can be put into use. It's a historic site. We can create walks around it. There's the area that one time they used to use for bird watching. We can have that, and we talk about diversifying our tourism economy earlier. That's something we can add to our tourism industry. You go there, at sometimes you see ducks, flamingos, you see just about every type of bird in the world there at that pond, and it can be used. In the South Hill area, we have Back Street, the most scenic route in Anguilla, and when you drive past, you can't see anything, nothing. You'll have to stop at a particular area and peep if you want to see the most beautiful village in Anguilla. That can easily be accomplished. We pay persons to clean the sides of the roads all the time. It cannot be much more difficult to get someone to keep the trees trimmed so that we can view the beauty of Sandy Ground. And then in North Hill, we have a basketball court area, and there's government land on either side. Again, I like to go back to the fact that I have young children and they have nothing to do outside. So I would definitely love to create a playing area in that field so they can go and not just be on their tablets all day.
Madam Moderator, my 3 opponents tonight, both mentioned Sandy Ground from Sandy Ground. First, we must do no harm to Sandy Ground. That must be the underlying motto. We must do no harm to Sandy Ground. Currently, the stability of Sandy Ground is under threat, not from the environment, but from the actions of our government. Our government is dredging the waters right off the sandbar, and it is destabilizing the sandbar. So first, if all of us here agree that Sandy Ground is the most picturesque site in Anguilla to be preserved, then a first option must be do no harm. As Mrs. Bradley said, she would like to enhance it, and there's a lot of things that we can do to enhance Sandy Ground. Both of my opponents tonight talk about enhancing it, and they are all feasible. Sandy Ground Pond is a historic site. Just last summer, quite a number of school kids wanted to see how the salt was picked. And there's a young man in Sandy Ground who took them in the pond and showed them how it was done. I believe that could become a tourist attraction and a means of income for someone. I know there have been, over the years, talk of dredging the pond to create a marina to create employment. Bad idea. Sandy Ground will disappear below the water if that is ever done. If I had the opportunity to be able to develop Sandy Ground, the first thing, the jetty that is being constructed there, that will go on the point. The second thing I'll do, the road leading from that jetty will lead to the northern side of the pond. That side of the pond I will develop as a fishing area. As it abuts the sea, I will fill in that side going to the jetty, and that I will use as a fishing dock to facilitate the fishermen of the area. And the fishermen of the area are not only from Sandy Ground, they're from West End, South Hill. In fact, there are more fishermen that use Sandy Ground from South Hill than they are from Sandy Ground. And that will be used to facilitate them.
Mr.
If we are
Hughes,
smart about it, we can do it.
your time is up. Does anyone want to rebut or add additional information? You'd have 1 minute to do such.
I'm good.
Sorry, just rebut.
Mr. Hughes, I know that the space in Sandy Ground is very, very sacred to the residents in Sandy Ground. And what I can assure you, that any development in Sandy Ground will not be void of an environmental impact assessment to assess the social, the economic, and impacts that such development will have on Sandy Ground. And of course, we cannot do that without the active participation of the residents in Sandy Ground. So you can be assured of that. As it is now, I do not think that any further development would move forward on that until those things are put in place.
Good to know.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes, I think I've walked through Sandy Ground quite a few times, and I can't find anyone in Sandy Ground who would want a marina in Sandy Ground. And our government is put in place to take care of the persons who elect them in the office. Not just the persons who elect them in the office, but the whole entire island. So if the persons of Sandy Ground do not, and I'm speaking about everyone in Sandy Ground, if they do not want a marina in Sandy Ground, then there's no need to even start a EIA or anything, because the persons do not want it. And again, Mrs. Bradley, I'm not jumping on you, but just a few weeks ago, the Minister of Infrastructure said on the radio, in the next 5 years, there will be a marina in Sandy Ground. The people of Sandy Ground, I can tell you without doubt, do not want a marina. So I would suggest that you have a different conversation with the Minister of Infrastructure and let him know, because you're the representative for the district, and you would have a better understanding of what goes on in the district, and let him know Sandy Ground do not want a marina.
I'd like to remind the crowd once again that when the candidates are speaking, please be quiet. We'll move on with the third question.
Can I
We have to stick to the 1 round of rebuttal only.
I didn't get one wrong.
Oh, you didn't? We apologize,
Okay,
Mr.
okay,
Hughes.
go ahead.
Please,
Go ahead.
please provide your rebuttal.
Put it in your next answer.
Sandy Ground is a sandbar resting on a very deep layer of mud. When I was informed that they were going to be dredging in Sandy Ground, I said to them, you know, I've been swimming there all my life and diving in Sandy Ground, and they were not going to find mud. When they start dredging, within 24 hours, they were pumping black sand mixed with mud. Only a couple of days ago, I watched them put in a 40-foot pole into the seabed. It took less than 3 minutes to reach the end of it, because the weight of the hammer on the pile sent it down to where it had to go. It had most distance to go, but the pile wasn't long enough because it was going through mud. And I know for sure, because in my previous life as a water engineer, along the road that leads to the cemetery, there are 2 wells that we dug. Those wells were 30 feet, but they were all in mud. Not one drop of water came out of those wells. So the entire base of Sandy Ground is mud. And we need to be very cognizant of that before we start to do anything. It is very likely that standing ground will disappear if we either mess with the sea or mess with the pond.
Okay, Mr. Hughes, thank you. Our third question from the audience. Do you see a connection between a livable wage and family planning? Do you see a connection between a livable wage and family planning? We are beginning with Mr. Richardson. You have 2 minutes to provide your answer.
Yes, I do. I have a family of 5, and like most persons in Anguilla, we were affected by COVID-19. So we have gone from a 2-income household to a 1-income household. And each month I try to think to myself, how do persons who are in this situation year-round handle this? Because you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this dollar into $1.50? So there definitely needs to be a living wage in Anguilla for persons to survive. I can't see no other way around it. The bills in Anguilla, they're not going down. The cost of living is very high. We pay a ginormous amount of taxes. You go to the fuel pump, there's taxes. You go pay your Anguilla bill, there's taxes. Communication taxes. You have to license your vehicle. So there are all taxes, and they do not come down. But if your wage stays down and that stays up, and then we have to take into fact, GST is about to be upon us, and still no talk of a minimum wage or a living wage. That's an additional tax that will be going on, and no talk of minimum wage. Thanks.
Mr. Hughes?
In a previous segment, I said minimum wage is not good enough. It must be a livable wage. And it has direct implications for this specific question. If we have a livable wage, parents do not have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet and leave their children undone. Having parents that can be parents to their children is critical if we are to develop a sustainable society. We need parents to spend part of their time with their children so that they can be parented. Otherwise, as the Trinidadians will say, we will end up with a lot of bandits. Parents need to be with parents at some part of the day. And they not having to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet is critical to ensuring that that happens. So there's definitely a nexus between a livable wage and parenting. There's something that Mrs. Bradley said earlier that I would like to come back to. Probably I'll come back to it in the next segment. But she talked about us having to deal with a senior citizen, and that is very critical. In today's Anguilla, we have at least around 10 persons who are 100 years or more. Our population is barely over 10,000. So we're talking about a 1 centenarian for every 1,000 persons, and that's a huge accomplishment. However, the manner in which they are treated is diabolical, and we need to address that. These were the ones who have sacrificed most for us to have what we have today, our Anguilla. They tied their belly and ensured that they didn't sell their land so that we could have a little piece to build a house on. That is quickly vanishing, but all kudos to them. And it is now time for us to step up to the plate to ensure that they can live the remainder of their days as comfortably as possible. The method of saying that children, because they have children, they should take care of them, that is not to be.
Mr. Hughes, your time is up, sorry.
Mrs. Bradley? You want me to repeat the question? Do you see a connection between a livable wage and family planning?
difference between a livable wage and family planning. I think the key word here is family planning, which implies that basically we need to sit, mothers and fathers, men and women, to sit and decide whether we want 2 children or 3 children, 1 or none at all. Because, of course, you know, things are getting harder, and given what is going on in a society, we have got to make those very, very important decisions. My fellow candidate here, Mr. Richardson, mentioned about a minimum wage. What I can say to you is that indeed minimum wage has been talked about for I don't know how long, but I know that the ministry is presently following the passage of the labor relations law in the House of Assembly. That is now the next charge by the ministry to actually look at the establishment of a minimum wage, which will indeed take some time, as we have to look at the economic situation, the cost of living, etc. It's an in-depth analysis of how we would proceed with arriving at a minimum wage. But I can tell you that it is something that is on the table. Again, Mr. Richardson. One thing I must also say, though, that a minimum wage does not guarantee that someone will actually get a raise in salary. What it really does is to bring up those persons who are under the minimum wage up to the minimum wage, but those persons who are already paid above a minimum wage will not benefit from any increase in the minimum wage.
Ms. Bradley, your time is up, sorry. You guys have a minute to offer a rebuttal if you so desire.
I would like to add that we cannot discuss the cost of living coming down unless we discuss the high price of our energy in Anguilla. It's a direct correlation with the bills we pay at the pump, a direct correlation with our food purchase, our utility bills. So the two go hand in hand. If we discuss minimum or a living wage, we have to discuss the cost of living in the island. The two go hand in hand, because if the living wage goes up and your bills go up, we are still in the same position. So the two must be discussed at the same time. Thanks.
I think this exercise is not an academic exercise. We need to examine what are the root cause of the cost of living being as high as it is. And until we come to terms with the reasoning, the underlying factors why things in Anguilla are as expensive as they are, we will not really address the problem. And from my standpoint, I believe, maybe wrong, but I believe, honestly, that things in Anguilla is as expensive as they are because the economic base of Anguilla is as small as it is. And if we want to get things down in Anguilla, we need to expand the economic base. And first among those, we need to understand that we need to grow our population and grow it in a very sensible way. But if we do not grow our population, things will always be as expensive as it is. I'm going to give you an example. We can benchmark anything in the world today, but benchmarking is only applicable if your population is about a nominal size. If it falls below that, because small populations such as ours still have to provide all of the basic necessities in order for us to have a society. And if you can only spread that cost over 10,000 people versus 20,000 people, 10,000 people have to pay more. So unless we can spread out the economic base that we have, we will not be able to start to address the high cost of living that we currently undergo. We must grow the economic base. And I must say here, in deference to the Premier, that he did mention something to that effect in his last budget, even though I thought the budget was a farce.
And we come to the last question of the night. And the question asks, do you see the legalization of marijuana being economically feasible? I will repeat. Do you see the legalization of marijuana being economically feasible? I think I lost track of who we are starting with.
I think I answered that one first. I answered the last one first, so I think it might be Mr. Hughes.
Mr. Hughes? We'll start with Mr. Hughes.
Is the legalization of marijuana economically feasible? Are we legalizing it to be a commercial product? Or are we legalizing it so that people can just use it as a recreational drug? If we are legalizing it as a recreational product, then we have to regulate it in some form or fashion. And then it becomes an economic product to be sold, and it can be economically feasible in that context. However, if it is used universally and everybody can grow their own marijuana, I don't understand how you'll be able to pay for it if you can get it for free. I think legalization of marijuana has its benefits because a lot of young kids use marijuana now in school, and they get that marijuana from behind the scenes. They are not averse to what debilitating effects it might have on their mental or physical development. And by bringing it out in the front, we can mandate that kids below a certain age should not be using marijuana, and we can alert the general public as to the dangers of using it. But whether it is an economic product or not, if we can grow it for ourselves to use, then no, it will be free as far as I'm concerned.
Mrs. Bradley, do you see the legislation of Do you see the legalization of marijuana being economically feasible?
Well, over the last number of years, we've been hearing about the legalization of marijuana throughout different parts of the world. But as I see it, if it is being done for medicinal purposes, because we've heard as well how effective marijuana can be for certain ailments. If it is being done on that type of scale for medicinal purposes, perhaps, yes, it could be economically viable.
Mr. Richardson, do you see the legalization of marijuana being economically feasible?
Yes, but not in the way a lot of persons would be thinking. Yes, because it will clear up our court systems, because if it's legal, our police will be freed up and wouldn't be chasing the young men for a joint. Yes, our court systems wouldn't have to be trying hundreds of cases for a simple dime bag. Yes, we won't have hundreds of young men in prison being wards of the state, causing a drain on our economy by having to feed them the 3 square meals, having the security for them. Yes, those same young men who are in prison for simple dime bag or a joint can be out in our communities, being productive citizens and contributing to our economy. That's how it will become viable and feasible.
Thank you, candidates. We will now move into the closing statements. You have 3 minutes to deliver your closing statement. We are starting with Mrs. Bradley.
First of all, let me say thank you once again for this opportunity to be here this evening. We are here as leaders and aspiring leaders, and the task before us could be a very difficult and formidable one. And I trust that as we go into this electioneering campaign, that all of us may recognize that we are offering our services for the benefit of Anguilla, and Anguilla is bigger than all of us. And it is important that we all work together. We may have different political persuasions, but I think it is very important that we all work together for the benefit of Anguilla. And let me say this, that we are living in a democracy, and each and every one of us have the right to support who we would want to support, but indeed we can do it in a very civil way and recognize that being disrespectful, being rude to others, being mean does not garner any votes. And I would ask that everyone conduct this campaign in an atmosphere of civility, respect, and understanding. And on the 29th of June, the people's voice will speak for all of us. And whatever that decision is, we all have to be able to accept it and live with it and recognize that Anguilla, we all have to exist and coexist in Anguilla together. Let love, peace, unity, and understanding prevail.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bradley. Mr. Richardson, your closing statement. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Coming here to this debate tonight, didn't know what to expect, but it was a really eye-opening experience for me. So I thank the organizers of this event. I thank you, our gracious moderators. I know this is being carried live because I'm here watching into 5 cameras. That alone says as to how far we've come as a nation. We have young persons who can deliver the best technology in the world. Just before the start of this event, I met a young man who unknowingly I have been admiring for this whole COVID-19 season because of the production he has been pulling off in the name of Rikiel Hodge. That's what I love about Anguilla. As a person who has been around a lot of young persons, the untapped potential in Anguilla, the potential that we keep ignoring, that's what I'm in this race for. Not because I want to be a minister of government, because I know it's going to be one rough job, but because I want to put myself in a position to help all Anguillians, and especially our very young, because I think for too long they've been ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Hughes, your closing statement. You have 3 minutes.
Madam Moderator, my life's work has been dealing with young people. I've been an organizer of cricket from the time immemorial. But Madam Moderator, I'd like to say, operating within the confines of our Constitution, the governance of our island home is crying out, demanding a new approach to governance. As I internalize the situation that the 3 of us here tonight, as Mrs. Bradley said earlier, we are all blood relatives. And the rancor and divisiveness that has been engendered in our politics this season is appalling, and it doesn't speak well for forging a brighter and a better future for our Anguilla. The principles of the Sustainable Development Goals have been echoed by a number of candidates throughout this campaign. throughout the length and breadth of this island. I would like to re-emphasize for persons here and those listening via social media that development, and indeed sustainable development, is not only about economics, but it is an all-encompassing, all-inclusive undertaking, which has been the theme of my campaign to date, the creation of an all-inclusive Anguillan society. The words of the 17th Sustainable Development Goal is particularly illuminating, and I quote it for you. A successful development agenda requires inclusive partnerships at all levels, global, regional, national, and personal, that should be built on goals, principles, visions, and shared ideals, while placing people and the planet at its center. People and the planet at its center. We should be, as leaders, politicians, designed to give people a better way of life for all of us. If I'm afforded the opportunity and the privilege to be elevated to one of the highest offices in this land, I will endeavor to conduct parliamentary business differently. If I'm a member of the opposition, I will have two guiding principles. First, to do no harm, and secondly, to create better outcomes. Opposing for opposing's sake is not good enough. We are sent to Parliament, all of us who do end up there, to provide better outcomes for our citizens. Secondly, if I'm offered the opportunity to be a member of the executive, I would like to be able to appoint a committee of the elected representatives to oversee the functioning of my ministry, so as to improve accountability, transparency, and provide inclusiveness. Without inclusiveness and accountability, it all falls apart. And the rancor and the divisiveness that we see today is part of the reason. That is part of the reason. People feeling left out of what is happening among us.
Mr.
And
Hughes,
we need
your
to
time
change
is up.
if we are to develop a sustainable, viable Anguilla. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. That brings us to the close of tonight's debate. Thank you very much, candidates, for a job well and respectfully done. I would like to take this opportunity to shout out our sponsors once again: Government of Anguilla, Flow, Titanium Audiovisual, Pink Mako, Ashley & Sons, and Aranel. The next debate will be the District 4 debate between Ms. Deanne Kentish-Rogers and Mr. Victor Banks. This will be taking place on Tuesday, June 16th, right here at 7 p.m. We look forward to you tuning in once again.
We would also like the audience to give the candidates, Mr. Romel Hughes, Mrs. Everly Bradley, and Mr. Merrick Richardson, a great round of applause.